Okay.
Once again, I'd like to welcome you to our 24th annual International Business Ethics Case Competition, the premier business ethics competition in the world. And it's great to see you all, and thank you very much to our student teams for joining us. We know that you've worked very hard. This is your first of 3 competitions, of course. This is your 30-minute, and tomorrow will be your 10-minute and your 90-second. I am Jim Arnold, and I'm your lead judge today. And just a little bit about me, I have been involved with IBEC for 15 years now, and that would be about 2006. I have brought student teams here, and I've been in the role of regular judge, and for a number of years now, I've been in the role of what we call Uber judge or lead judges. And with me today are 3 very seasoned professionals in different areas surrounding business ethics and compliance. So let's go with each of you 3, and we'll have you tell the group a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll move on, and students will introduce themselves as well. Leon, would you like to start out?
Sure, thank you. My name is Leon Goldman. I'm currently the chair of the advisory board for the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics at Bentley University. In a prior life, I actually began my life as a general surgeon at a Boston-based academic medical center, and then became their chief compliance and privacy officer and began their privacy program and their compliance program. There was none when I started. And I'm currently just doing my work at Bentley.
Great, thank you. Jessica?
Hey everybody, my name is Jessica Druwski. I'm actually an alum of this program as well. I presented with a graduate MBA team from my university, St. Thomas, in, I believe, 2014 with Professor Arnold. I now work at AWS and I'm living in Seattle, and I'm a compliance program manager. I've had past roles at both Medtronic and US Bank in the ethics space.
Wonderful. And welcome to Jessica. Sarah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Mccool. Like Jessica, I presented at this competition in 2018. I was in Professor White's class at Mount Holyoke. And then after that, I started working for a small consulting firm in DC where we focused on international business and the interaction of international relations and business interest. And then now I work in the State Department for the Secretary of State, who I worked with in consulting previously. So a lot of interest in ethics, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Everybody in this room is very important, but there's one person who I think is the most important, who we could not do without, and that's our technical professional, who is Robbie. And Robbie has been with us for a long time. Robbie, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Jim, for that. Yeah, I'm Robbie Rajan. I am alumni from Loyola Marymount University. I've known Tom since it began back in 1996, the whole competition. So last 25 years. I work at the Raytheon Corporation in Santa Barbara as a storage engineer here. So thank you. If you guys have any problems, I've dropped my number in the chat window, so you can call me or use the chat function as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Anybody have any questions for Robbie to start with? I know that in this day and age, he's absolutely indispensable. So anybody have any concerns? Okay. Thank you to our judges and to Robbie and our 3 students. You can go in any order that you like, and just tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I guess I'll go first. My name is Annika Cernak, and I'm a junior at Penn State, and I'm studying supply chain, and I'm minoring in management information systems. This summer, I'm going to be a supply chain intern for Blue Yonder, which I'm very excited about. And so thank you for having us here. We're very excited to share our presentation with you today.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Anna Schimek. I'm a sophomore at Penn State studying management information systems with minors in economics and the legal environment of business. This summer, I will be interning for Erie Insurance as an IT intern, which is wonderful because I'm from Erie originally, so I'm excited to give back to my town. And as Annika said, thank you so much for having us. I'm very excited to present on our topic.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Hello, everyone. My name's Katherine Groves. I'm also a junior at Penn State. I'm studying supply chain management with a minor in French. A little fun fact about me, I love to cook, but going back to kind of my career, I've interned with the Hershey company, and I'm actually going to be working out in an Ohio plant with Land O'Lakes this summer. So I'm super excited to kind of explore all ideas of business and, look at where ethics comes in. And again, like everyone said, we're so grateful to be here. Thank you for having us.
We're so excited to have you as well. And our plan, of course, is to be back live next year in Boston. So for those of you who are not graduating this year, we hope you'll consider to come back and join us live in Boston. Now we've read your executive summaries, and we see that you have assigned us the role of CEO and executive team at Google. Am I correct on that?
Yes,
correct?
That's correct.
Can you define executive team? Is that the same as board of directors, or is that different?
So that's going to be kind of all of Google's like senior vice presidents, whether it's kind of logistics, whether they have their vice president of ethics, kind of all of that high level that the CEO is always working with any decisions and operations.
Okay, so we're basically all the C-suite people at Google who are together for a meeting. And what is the role that you are playing, team?
Yeah, I can answer this one. We are consultants for Google in this case.
Okay, so you are outside consulting for Google. Excellent.
Yes, we are.
Excellent. I know that you've certainly seen what I'm about to read, and all, but we start by reading this paragraph. It's right off of our website because we do want everyone to start on a level playing field. So even though you are familiar with all this, I am going to read it again. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges, which you have done. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin, which you've done. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion, so basically 30 minutes, to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. While you are speaking, we will not interrupt you. At the end of 30 minutes, I will say time is up. And if you're still talking at that point, please get to the end in just a few sentences or so. When you're finished, the judges are going to ask you questions for about 20 minutes. And we are going to stay in our role as the executive team. You are going to stay in your role as the consultants. Now, some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical, philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness in scoring. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. And also, if we were live, you would be making eye contact with us as the judges. And we want to have that again today. But of course, as you know, in Zoom, it's a little different. You're going to want to look down at the screen at us, but that's not eye contact. So we are going to ask you to be looking at your cameras when you are speaking. Any questions from anyone before we get started? Ravi is going to be spotlighting everyone. So the speaking student will be the only person that's on the screen, along with any PowerPoints that are going to be used. And if there are no questions, we will let you get started, and I will start the 30-minute timer. Good luck. Again, welcome to IBEC.
Okay, hi everyone. Again, my name is Annika, and I'm here with my colleagues Anna Schimek and Katherine Groves. And today we are going to be talking about this topic of Google bringing back the corporate town. So what do you think of when I say corporate town? You're probably thinking of an isolated community, maybe of coal mining workers where these workers are easily exploited. But actually most of these issues of past corporate towns simply aren't relevant anymore. But there are new ethical issues that are brought up today with a corporate town. So today we're here to talk more about this modern version of a corporate town that Google is proposing in their headquarters area, which is Mountain View, California. So thank you, Google, for bringing us on as consultants to ensure that we can address both past issues of corporate towns and also new ethical issues that are brought up. And so we can also work to create value for the most stakeholders involved. So this is our agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about what this community looks like and how it compares and contrasts with past corporate towns and how it creates and extracts value for stakeholders. Next, we're going to evaluate Google's proposed plan from a legal, financial, and ethical standpoint. And we'll see that while this plan is legal and financially viable, that we do need to address ethical concerns in order to make this community work. And lastly, we'll discuss recommendations for Google and next steps to drive future success. So like I mentioned before, this is a proposed plan that has not been approved yet. And your plan is to implement this mixed use community. So this means housing, office space, green space, an elementary school, a grocery store, retail stores, all in one neighborhood that you're calling Middlefield Park. And again, this is in Mountain View, which is the area of your headquarters, and this is in the larger Bay Area. So this is the modern version of the corporate town because you are so prevalent in the area, as you can see on the right side of the slide, some stats to support that. So the general public might think of past corporate towns back in the 1880s to 1930s, and they might associate negative consequences with these past corporate towns. But now my colleague Anna is going to address these concerns.
So as Annika mentioned, the original corporate towns existed in the US largely between the 1880s and the 1930s. And while the original conception of these towns was good, with a goal to create a utopian workers' village, a web of problems quickly started to develop after they began. So you can see here a couple issues. The first was remote location. These towns were very isolated, and so they cut off workers from the rest of the world from traveling elsewhere for potentially looking for other jobs. Additionally, these towns, because they were isolated, had their own affairs, and within these affairs, there was a lack of worker voices being heard. Additionally, employees were forced to live in this community and pay a higher rent than what was market price. They were also paid in script payments, so they could only use the money that they were given at company stores. And this just led to excessive company control overall. So as you can see, there's a lot of ethical misalignment with previous company towns. And while people may be concerned about these issues cropping up with Google's new community, we can see that many of them are no longer relevant. So for the case of the towns being located in a remote area, Google's town is in the Bay Area, which is heavily populated. There's opportunities for transportation and travel, so the employees won't be isolated. Additionally, paying with script payments is no longer a practice, certainly not by your company, and so that's not an issue either. We see that with employees feeling like they have no voice in local affairs, that while this town is a community, it's not isolated, and so it doesn't have its own affairs where workers won't be heard. And then finally, we are proposing that employees are not forced to live in this town and that the rent will be at market price. So with all of these, we see that many of these issues are no longer relevant because corporate towns are no longer isolated. However, we do see new issues crop up in the modern world. Because of our interconnectedness, more people are going to be affected by your actions. So we have to consider all stakeholders that your initiative will touch. And this becomes prevalent in the housing crisis that is affecting the Bay Area, which we'll touch on later in our presentation. So in looking what you guys are currently working on, your proposed plan is to build this community in the city that houses your current headquarters, which is Mountain View, California. More specifically, the East Weissman neighborhood, which is 412 acres, is where you're planning to build, and it already houses 2 high-tech Google campuses, the Quad campus and the Fairchild campus. And you can see in the green area on the map that this is where you're proposing to build this new Middlefield Park community. So in this new reimagined corporate town or community in Middlefield Park, there will be many features that will make it a much better place for employees to live than the corporate towns of the past. So now, to touch on Google's commitment to aiding in the Bay Area housing crisis and give our legal analysis, I will pass things off to Katherine.
Thanks, Anna. So when we think about past corporate towns, they were really only focused on serving the company and figuring out how do we want to deal with the employees. But this new modern corporate town that Google is developing needs to recognize the importance of other groups. And that's something your company has already done. In 2019, you made a commitment to be a good neighbor in the Mountain View area, to positively contribute to the larger community that you were a part of. And you said you were going to do this by pledging $1 billion over the next 10 years to different initiatives. Things like donating to nonprofits that help with housing issues like homelessness and displacement, incentivizing developers to make sure that they're actually building houses in the area as opposed to other things. And finally, most importantly, the biggest part of your commitment and where Middlefield Park falls under, repurposing your commercial land and actually working with local governments to develop neighborhoods where houses can be built. So what we see here is that Google, you've already recognized that there's a bigger issue going on behind the scenes. There's some frightening trends in the Bay Area right now. There's a housing crisis. Over the past few decades, housing production's fallen significantly, below 50% of what it was in the late 20th century. And this is a problem because we still see that population in the area is growing. And so what we're seeing is there's an increased demand for houses in the area, but the supply is not matching up. And as a result, both home and rent prices are being driven upwards. So this is a problem in the area for one reason, that more people's incomes are now going to affording housing, and their quality of life overall can be brought down just because they don't have money to focus on other joys and things in life that we all need. But also it's a bigger problem too, because in some cases, people are actually being forced to leave their homes in the Bay Area. They're actually being displaced, which is a really great problem, a really big problem that needs to be dealt with sometime in the near future. And we want to call out the difference between what we're proposing in past corporate towns. In both cases, there's an issue driven where a lot of people are coming into an area because of jobs. So we see that in the past corporate towns and we see that today, but that's kind of where the similarities end. When we think about past corporate towns, they were going into isolated areas, creating new industries where the town was going to revolve completely around that industry. But when we look at the world today, it's so much more different than the 19th century. You know, people are more interconnected, and Google needs to make sure that they're considering everyone who this issue is going to touch. So when we consider all the stakeholders affected by this housing crisis, we see that Google is affected both indirectly and directly. Looking first at directly, there's a negative perception of tech companies right now for driving this housing crisis by bringing in employees who can afford more luxury homes. But there's also workforce implications. There's chances that they're losing employees who don't want to come to the area, or employees who do come are struggling to find houses. Both of these things can negatively impact Google financially and threaten returns that shareholders are looking for. But again, unlike past corporate towns, we need to make sure we're considering other people outside of the company. So looking at the Bay Area community, right now residents are facing a really high cost of living, and it's causing a lot of issues, including the fact that they're getting kicked out of their homes. And this is something that the city has recognized, and they're feeling a lot of pressure to fix this issue, but they're not really sure where to go. And so that's where Google can come in. With this commitment to building neighborhoods, we can create value for all of the people involved. By building neighborhoods, we're providing more houses for both employees and the Bay Area community, some of it at an affordable rate, which will ultimately help with this issue. Additionally, bringing in a neighborhood to an area that was previously vacant will boost economic activity. So we see here that Google has an opportunity to turn their reputation around, to rise as a leader who's taking action to address this bigger issue and to help the city with this problem, but also set the tone for other companies in the area to do the same. This initiative has the potential to help a lot of different people, but it is a big issue. We don't expect that Google is going to solve the entire housing crisis in the Bay Area. That's not realistic, but little by little, with companies and the city working together, we can make change. And that's why we're focusing first on Middlefield Park, Google's new proposed corporate town. We want to make sure that we do this town the right way so that you can continue to make change in the future. And to do this, we proposed a plan that makes sure it's helping Google be a good citizen by abiding to all local laws. It's generating revenue for the company so that you can be successful in the long term. And finally, it's creating value. But we want to differentiate. It's not like corporate towns of the past where the value was only for the company. We want to make sure that value is being created for all stakeholders so that we can minimize ethical risks. And to do that, we need to start by understanding the legal atmosphere that you're operating in. So in California, Proposition 13 puts restrictions on the amount of property taxes that the city can charge. And then on the other hand, we have California Mitigation Fee Act, which is going to allow the charge of development impact fees. So these are fees that the city can charge on any projects to help them build any public infrastructure or utilities needed to support them. And so ultimately from these laws, we see a few problems are actually arising. So because of Proposition 13, it's more likely that a city is going to zone for commercial use because they need some source of revenue and they see them being able to get it through sales tax. Secondly, on the chance that they are zoning land for residential use, these impact fees are actually pushing developers to build more expensive homes, therefore not really helping the housing crisis. They know that if they go for these more expensive homes, this is a group of consumers who's less price sensitive and will pay more to ultimately cover that impact fee that they're now being charged. So as a result, in the grand scheme of things right now, fewer and more expensive houses are being built. Now, if this was a corporate town of the past, we wouldn't really care because the corporate towns of the past were isolated. They were only focused on coming into a new market and serving the company. But Google needs to realize, and I think you already have, with this new corporate town, there's a lot more people we need to consider. We can't just act in our own bubble. We have to act within the law and the benefit of the better community. And so looking specifically into Middlefield Park, Google can legally build this proposed town. They just need to make sure it's in alignment with the general plan. So California state law requires that every city has a plan to guide development and growth. Mountain View has created one, and it dictates things like land use, development regulations that Google needs to pay attention to. And we wanted to call out that 15% of the units need to be going towards affordable housing in any plan that's built within Mountain View. So the city is also recognizing this housing issue and the impacts it could have in the future and doing its best to take action. So Google needs to make sure that we're aligning to that as well. And like I said, the general plan is fairly high level. There's more specific plans for each neighborhood. So we need to look at East Weissman, where Google's proposing on building this Middlefield Park. And we see themes of building a diverse community with people of mixed incomes and making sure that there's public space and sustainable development. And most importantly, East Weissman wants to preserve their neighborhood character while also hand in hand growing economically. When we think back to the old concept of a corporate town, those two ideas don't really align. Those corporate towns were isolated, focused only on the company and finding the best way to operate to generate profits for that company. And that's not going to work here, which is why ultimately we need to throw out the old version of a corporate town. And we need to focus on working with you, Google, to create a new modern version that works well for everyone and adapts to the way that business works now. And while we do have this plan that's perfectly legal for you, we do think there are concerns that still need to be addressed. Thanks, Catherine. So before we take a look at the finances, I'd like to call out a legal issue with one of the laws that Catherine mentioned. So also, as Catherine mentioned, the city requires that 15% of the units be affordable housing, but you're actually going beyond that and you're dedicating 20% of the units to the city, and this land is ceded in perpetuity to the city. And this town will be built in phases over the next 20 years. Now, the issue with this is that the California Mitigation Fee Act says that Google, you don't have to pay all impact fees until this 20-year timeline is complete. So basically the impact fees will be paid over time as developments are completed. And impact fees are just to fund the extra public infrastructure needed, since there are extra resources that are needed due to these new developments. So overall, the issue is that the city uses these impact fees to fund their building of the affordable housing. So since the city doesn't have these impact fees day one, they can't immediately start building the affordable housing. So now looking at the costs and benefits of this proposed town, I'd like to point out that you already own this land, but the largest cost will be building the residential units. So although there are significant costs, we see that there are many revenue sources, such as possible millions in tax breaks. And we have seen this in other examples of tech companies across the country. And when they make data centers, this brings in economic activity, or they could be environmentally green or efficient, which means millions in tax breaks for these companies. So there could be possible millions in tax breaks, rent revenue from both retail space and housing in this neighborhood, as well as an increase in employee attraction and retention rates. So although we see there are significant upfront development costs, the long-term benefits outweigh these costs. And we have seen that in the past. The issue with past corporate towns is that they were only focused in the short term, but we know that you are focused on long-term goals. And so this is a financially successful option. So diving deeper into this topic of an increase in talent attraction and retention, we see right now you have immense hiring and training costs due to this housing crisis in the Bay Area, where employees are just leaving California now because they can't find housing or it's too expensive. But we feel that these hiring and training costs will be reduced with this community. And this kind of community especially appeals to millennials and Gen Z because they tend to crave low commute time, so being really close to the office, lots of green space, modern housing, being part of a tight-knit community. So we feel that this will result in an overall increase in talent attraction and retention rates, and this goes hand in hand with a decrease in hiring and training costs. So now we have analyzed Google legally and financially, and we see that Google's plan abides to all local laws, and also their long-term revenue sources outweigh their upfront costs, making it financially viable. So now let's switch our gears to discuss how Google can implement this in an ethical way.
So before we propose our solution and begin our ethical analysis of it, we need to know what ethics means to Google. So this quote from the very first line of the Google Code of Conduct shows the importance of ethics to your company. So with that in mind, we crafted our solution in a way that allows the new Google community to be created in a way that is of the highest possible ethical standards. So as we look at the ethics of the proposed community, we must keep in mind your guiding principles as outlined in the Google Code of Conduct. These principles have helped us come up with a solution that strongly aligns with your ethical values, which include accountability, care, commitment, fairness and consistency, and transparency. So given these guiding principles, our solution has 4 very important points that we believe will help you create your community in an ethical way. So the first is ensuring that the proposed town is not company exclusive, so that you do not create the same issues that we have seen in company towns of the past by isolating your employees and your company. The second is not building luxury homes and instead implementing a modular building design. Modular building design is when buildings are constructed off-site and then assembled on-site using the same materials, codes, and standards as conventional facilities. This will give Google savings of over $191 million, which can be redistributed elsewhere, like giving more land to the city or lowering rent costs. The third piece is paying the impact fees either upfront or in a more condensed timeline so that the city can start building that affordable housing sooner to aid with the housing crisis. And then finally, we advise that you communicate transparently with all of your stakeholders throughout this process. We know that transparency is important to you. And with such a big project that will impact all of your stakeholders, we want to make sure that they're kept in the loop, especially regarding costs, incentives, plans, and progress. So overall, we have two main ethical concepts that guided us to our plan of action, and those are justice as fairness and virtue ethics. So the ideas of being just and fair to not only Google and Google employees, but to the surrounding community underlie each part of our solution. Ensuring that the company town is not company exclusive is just and fair because the social good of housing is not being distributed unequally if we do this. If the town is only Google employees, it prohibits anyone else from living in the area, and it may force out non-Google employees from the area if the cost of living increases due to an overall income increase in the area. And again, we also see the ethical issues of the past corporate towns being caused by this isolation. And so this piece of our solution is one way to avoid those issues occurring again. Similarly, if we're trying to help solve the housing crisis, you can't be building luxury homes that non-Google and Google employees can't afford. This will only exacerbate the issue and disadvantage the people who are already suffering because of the housing crisis. The modular building design will help to lower costs, which can in turn lower the cost of living, which will assist with the housing crisis. Additionally, to aid with the housing crisis, we recommend that you pay the impact fees in a more condensed timeline. Because you currently pay them over time, the city cannot develop the affordable housing units quickly. This means that people who need affordable housing are at a disadvantage for when they can move into the area, which doesn't help with the housing crisis. And as we discussed, you must also be just and fair to your stakeholders. Withholding information from any of your stakeholders for whatever reason is wrong. They have a right to know what is going on as your actions directly impact them. And finally, we draw back on your guiding principles and virtue ethics. Are you being who you say you are and who you are saying you want to be? Each part of our solution aligns with at least one of your guiding principles. So as we mentioned, making the company town not company exclusive ensures that individuals are treated respectfully, fairly, and compassionately. Avoiding luxury homes and implementing modular building design sets a tone at the top of commitment to a respectful, safe, and inclusive environment. Paying impact fees in a more condensed timeline shows respect and empathy for the community in which Google resides. And finally, communicating with all stakeholders aligns with your commitment to communicating openly and transparently to all members of your organization. So now that we've presented our solution and evaluated its ethicality, I'm going to pass things back to Katherine to wrap it up.
Thanks, Anna. We came here today and you presented us with a problem to help you with. Google was planning on developing a town, but we needed to make sure that people weren't going to associate this project with the problematic corporate towns of the past. We also needed to make sure that this plan was actually aiding in the housing crisis. Something that's important to Google. Mountain View is your home. You want to be a good neighbor, and you made a commitment to doing that. So we made sure that our solution helped you deliver on that promise. We proposed a way to ethically create this new and modern corporate town that was responsive to the housing crisis going on in the larger area. We also made sure that this plan aligned with the goals of the community within which you were operating. We made sure that this plan was first legal and financially viable, but we didn't stop there. We made sure that we had a solution for you that considered all of the stakeholders involved and created value for everyone. If you do this right, if you implement this plan, Google has the opportunity to show the public how committed you are to your guiding principles and adhering to them in every action you take. There's an opportunity to deliver on that promise to be a good neighbor, but also to be a role model to other companies in the area and set the tone for how we do business in the future. By implementing this project, Google creates value for a company and other stakeholders specific to this Middlefield Park project, but there's also an opportunity to apply this solution to other areas in the future to continue to be a company that drives meaningful change. And we would love the opportunity to work with you to do this. We'd now like to open the floor for any questions regarding our proposed plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And now Robbie will take us off of Spotlight, so we're all looking at each other here.
Done.
We're off of Spotlight, and can we get rid of the slides too?
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
So we all are here. Okay, very good. And thank you very much. we are going to, of course, stay in our roles as Google executives. I do have the first question, and then we'll just go back and forth as much as we need to. I have a two-part question. The first part, you're mixing Google employees with non-employees. That sounds like a great idea. Is there a percentage of employees and a percentage of non-employees that is a target for us? Turn off your mutes.
We don't recommend we don't recommend specific percentages. We do expect it to be mostly Google employees just because Google is so prevalent in this area. You are the #1 major employer in this area. So again, we're not making it company exclusive, but we do expect it to be majority Google employees.
Yeah, we do recommend that Google continues to kind of work with the city to monitor kind of who's living there. But if we think to the past, thinking about affirmative action in colleges, there was a lot of issues when these colleges actually set specific percentages of what their population wanted to be. And it's a little different here because that's looking at people's diverse backgrounds. But part of who we work for is our background. So we think that avoiding specific numbers or quotas to be working to, but also making sure that Google's still monitoring what's going on and encouraging a more diverse environment is the best way to proceed.
Okay, now the second part of my question is, you have talked about the DEI, the diversity and equity and inclusion piece, by including people of different income levels. That's great. And I assume that some of the other DEI variables, nationality, et cetera, are going to be addressed as well. There's one piece of DEI that's going to be important, and it was an issue back in the days of some other corporate campuses. It's a little bit harder to grasp. Whenever you put a group of people together, it's going to automatically create a culture. That's automatically going to happen. So there's a risk here in, you're going to have people that live in the town, and people from Google that don't. And so there's a risk of creating an in crowd and an out crowd, two different groups that are very different. And there's even a possibility of creating a caste system in something like this. And so the people who are on campus and off campus, there is a DEI issue there. I hope I've explained that okay. Now, so my interest is, how will we make sure that the DEI element of inclusion will adequately include all people who live on the campus and don't live on the campus, and treat all of them equally?
I think one thing, an important kind of starting place to think about addressing that issue is just making sure that the company itself makes no differentiation between whether or not their employees are working or living in this corporate town or living somewhere else. And that's kind of the first step. There obviously is a lot more steps that need to be taken. Just because the company itself is not making any differentiation doesn't necessarily mean that the people, the employees, aren't kind of realizing that there are differences. So I think one option that we recommend that Google explores, and we'd be happy to help with this, is maybe looking into having some initiatives throughout the company, and even creating employee resource groups that are pretty common to big companies, and Google does them themselves, to make sure that we're getting people who live in this town and out of this town together and talking and having conversations so it doesn't feel separate. I think that's one good place for Google to start. I think we definitely recommend that it's an issue that we keep considering and modifying our approach, but I think that's where we'd want to start.
And we also believe that, looking at it from a bit of an ethical standpoint, Google has this commitment to the Bay Area, to the city in which they reside. Mountain View is where their headquarters are. They don't just have campuses there, it's their main area. And so we know that looking into these initiatives, it's something that we believe Google would want to do to follow those guiding principles and show their commitment, not just to their employees in the area, but to the greater community, because that is one of the principles that guides our actions. So we think that not only with those specific initiatives, but the reasoning behind them, the meaning behind them, can help to encourage that inclusion, because it is one of Google's goals to be committed to the city and all people there, regardless of their employment with the company.
I'd also just like to reiterate that this is a very mixed use community. So although there is housing in this community, there will be office space and parks and stores. So other Google employees that are not living in this community will still be a part of the community, even if they don't live there. So we do feel that this is the best solution to help in this housing crisis.
Thank you. We'll just open it up to the rest of the judges and just jump in with whatever questions you have.
So I have a couple of questions. My first is for clarification. I have a great deal of trouble with the term town. One, because of the past history, but the other is you're describing a community within an existing city. This is not a new town. Am I correct that this is a community that will be developed in an existing city? The city already exists, Mountain View exists. It's just a new set of streets in a suburb, maybe, if you will. Is that correct?
Yes, this is correct. I guess a better term would be a neighborhood. So, Google already owns this land, but they haven't developed it yet. So there was a slide with a map. I don't think we'll be able to bring it up now, but it shows that there are 2 Google campuses right now already on this area, but Middlefield Park is this neighborhood that Google will build on their existing land in the greater city of Mountain View, California.
So what will our Google's responsibility be for the increased load that this will bring on the police, the school system, the fire department, and other existing services that will need to be increased?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's actually what the impact fees are for. So Google will have to pay millions in impact fees to the city to support this extra public infrastructure that is needed.
So just to add on to that, Google is the one who's taking the steps to develop the town, but they're working hand in hand with the city. It aligns with their general plan and that East Weissman specific precise plan. So while Google's the one who's physically providing the means of creating this community and helping with the decision-making process, they're ultimately working with the city, and that's kind of where the city comes in more to make sure things like the police force are being supported. And that's ultimately where the general plan comes in. They know that growth is coming and they're anticipating it. So Google will work with the community, but ultimately it's not Google's direct responsibility to figure those things out, but it's in Google's best interest to work with the community and make sure that, this goes right, because they're committing to building this town because we believe that it will go right. So we need to make sure we're taking the steps to ensure that we do it the best way possible.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. You did a really great job of analyzing a variety of different stakeholders, but I'm a skeptic, and you made it seem like this is a positive for all stakeholders. Can you tell me what stakeholders, if any, you could see some harm coming to from this situation and your proposal? And did you consider the possibility for litigation from any of these stakeholders? And walk me through your thought process on that.
Yeah, so I can start us off. We definitely do recognize that any solution, this solution, Middlefield Park, couldn't possibly solve every issue, and every plan does have some downsides, but we went for one that maximized the most value for everyone involved. But there is a potential that this small community of about 19,000 homes isn't going to do that much to help the housing crisis, and there's a potential that there's still going to be community members who are struggling to afford housing no matter what we do. And then so with those groups of community members who are struggling, there could be a fear with a big company coming in that, or a misconception that, they're not being helped. So we want to help Google make sure that's not happening, but there is a possibility that residents in the area could file lawsuits just based on kind of not necessarily misinformation, but kind of how past historically they've been treated, and the sense that the company's not really out to help them. So there's a potential there for lawsuits of coming in, taking up their space, not treating them fairly.
Quick follow-up question before I turn it over to other judges, and that has to do with what you just mentioned of kind of misinformation, or maybe not knowing the positives of this. How have you considered how we can actually live out that transparency value? You mentioned that we need to be equally transparent with all stakeholders. Did your team think at all about how we might do that, what that comp plan might look like, or just kind of a general theory behind that transparency and how we go about that with these stakeholders?
Yeah, so absolutely. One thing that we've noticed, Google does a very great job, or has done a very good job at communicating with the city about what their plans are and working hand in hand with the city. But we think there's an opportunity to open up forums as the company is continuing to develop these plans for the specific town, to make sure that community voices have an opportunity to be heard, to share their thoughts, or to hear what Google is planning. So we think one way to touch that local community is to do that. We also think it's really great. Google's been keeping this on the down low right now. We strongly recommend that you actually start talking about in the news, talking about in your press releases or in your quarterly financial reviews, that this is something that's up and coming and will drive growth. We think that's a really great way to get the public aware, because right now Google is aware, the employees are aware. The problem is the people, the residents, the bigger community that Google's a part of isn't aware. And so we think that a communication plan that targets them would be the best.
Thank you.
I just have one thing to add on to that. So actually, last year, you have requested a development in Texas, and this was under a mysterious name that was not Google. And Google actually reaped millions in tax breaks from this development. And then the city revealed that Google was actually the mystery company 2 months after the project was formally approved. So we feel that maybe the community might have spoken out, or could at least address their concerns if they knew that this was Google's development plans. So we feel that being transparent to the community, the very least admitting that it is your own company, Google. And like Katherine said, I think it's really important to take the initiative and go to media to make sure that there is media coverage in the community to make them aware, and so that we can address any concerns that they have. So taking the initiative, I think, is really important.
Thanks.
Katherine, what do you think of that? Oh, I'm sorry, not Katherine, Anna.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the ethics portion, as transparency being one of Google's guiding principles, it's so important that we do communicate with all stakeholders. And Katherine mentioned forums. Along with that, the idea of having town halls that are open to, of course, not just employees, but anyone in the area. And then keeping with, as we've adjusted to a bit more of relating things through technology during the pandemic, there are a lot of people who, like you mentioned, might not feel comfortable coming to something that they think is wholly Google. So they think maybe the town hall is just for Google employees, my voice won't be heard there. They can obviously come to the town halls and it's encouraged, but then with the new technology, we encourage either live streaming or making it available on Google's website so that any information that is given at these town halls can be accessed by anyone in the community, and they can be kept up to date on what Google is doing and exactly what's going on, as well as concerns that people in the community who go to the town halls present and how Google is responding to those. So we think that having this open line of communication, whether it's through technology or in person or both, is very important and will help with the transparency between Google and the larger community.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. So I kind of, to echo what Jim and Leon and Jessica have asked, I'm a little bit skeptical about the in-group, out-group aspect of the project. And one of the things that I'm kind of wondering is, how, if we're expecting the majority of people in this community moving in to be Google employees, but we're setting aside a certain number of units or a certain amount of space for low-income housing, how this proposed plan helps to mitigate housing crises in the Bay Area and not actually play into them by creating kind of an area for, you know, employees of tech companies who are generally considered to be a huge part of the problem in the housing crisis in these areas, and kind of building a nicer community for them to live in, and then kind of having also a subsect of people who are perhaps the most removed group from what those tech companies are doing in the Bay Area, by having kind of this mixing that I could see like the thought behind going very well as sort of like a public service to the community, but in reality, especially given how much people for some reason seem to hate having low-income housing in their neighborhood, how Google as a whole plans to kind of interact with those tensions, and how having sort of this like taking your corporate culture, as Jim suggested, and kind of standing it up there interacts with those socioeconomic challenges.
Sure. So I can start this off and take a little bit of it. We don't intend for there to be this huge difference between the affordable housing that the city is building and then the housing that Google is building. Obviously, there will be some differences, but part of our solution is to implement that modular building design. And so we're not intending for Google to build luxury homes in this area. We are advising against that because we don't want this difference, this socioeconomic difference, to be so apparent. So these units that Google will be building, aside from the affordable housing, will not be $1 million units, and their apartments, so they won't even be that much regardless. But we would hope that by implementing the modular building design, making the units lower cost, that people who maybe are on the border between needing affordable housing and being able to afford housing that's not necessarily luxury but isn't affordable will be able to live in some of those units as well. And so with avoiding the luxury homes, we're hoping that there's not this huge gap. And while we've considered that that may alienate some people who desire the luxury homes, we took into account the justice principle with this, and how when we make inequalities in society, they're supposed to benefit the least advantaged people. And so we're focusing our efforts on those lower socioeconomic groups. And so that's why we're trying to avoid the luxury housing, to, again, close that gap so that there isn't this difference between these are the people who live in affordable housing, these are the people who live in Google units. And so I'm sure Annika or Katherine could elaborate more on a couple other pieces of your question, but that's just to get us started and kind of emphasize that we're trying to close that gap so it's not this big difference between different groups.
And I think it's important to acknowledge, and we understand where you're coming from, that putting two diverse groups together, there's a chance that those of the lower income in the affordable housing are going to kind of feel marginalized, especially since, you know, they're in their own little part of the city that's being developed. But we think it's important to understand that we recognize this is a really big issue, and Google's going to do what's within their control to contribute positively. And we recognize that we can't solve everything overnight, but we think this is a really great way to at least get housing into an area that was previously vacant. That we believe is at least the first step to kind of aiding this housing crisis. And the company Google, you actually have a lot of different commercial lands across the Mountain View area where you can kind of continue this trend. So we recommend kind of using Middlefield Park as that first corporate town, figure out kind of how it works, see if anything doesn't work, and move forward from there. Because we are definitely concerned, and part of the issue we came here to address was this larger housing crisis. So we want to make sure we're not worsening it with our proposal.
Yeah, I think the follow-up kind of question I have, just to nail down a little bit more on then what the actual intent of who from Google is, from our company, is meant to be living in the housing, is so if you're building modular apartment units for this space, we're probably not expecting then the broadest subsect of coders, the tech company people that we all think about and see in the news who make tons and tons of money and move to these places. So we're looking at a different kind of cut across of the Google employee population. And so then I guess my question is like, is there then an in-company culture division between the people who have to live in Google units and the people who are able to live in like cooler part of the cities that are set up? Does the culture like follow people home from work? I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, and I think you guys addressed, but I think is still a larger question, is how like the cultural and the softer aspects of dividing people are still going to affect the issue. And then especially when we add things in, like Google employs a lot of immigrants, right, who come from other places to work there. And so is there a potential for kind of that mix to come in where it's sort of like people are from all over the world, but it's mostly people who aren't from the US or mostly people who don't have roots there? So I'm wondering also kind of as a follow-up question, and then I'll toss it to others, how you are going to decide on who gets which units. So if supply is smaller than demand, and there comes into a time where Google, who owns these properties and is the landlord of them, how do they decide which employees and which community members are going to get to live there? Have they thought about kind of what is going to go into like credit histories or acceptable use, backgrounds, homeowners associations? Like I could see all of those being potential problems, potential PR problems for Google through the idea of this corporate town.
Yeah, I can start us off here. That's a great point. To answer kind of the first part of your question, like Anna mentioned, this is a difficult topic when you're mixing so many different kind of people in one neighborhood. But like Anna said, we are trying to give the opportunity to the less advantaged people who may not be making as much to afford, luxury houses outside the city. So although we can't cater to every type of Google employee, we want to give the option for a modest income employee to at least have the option to live there. And that is a great question of how are the employees going to be chosen to live here? That's still something that we're considering. We thought a lot about this, but we do believe that kind of like a first come, first served system would help. And although that's very vague, you guys haven't exactly prioritized what kind of requirements or like prerequisites will be helpful to choose the housing. So that's still something that we're considering, but we understand that it is a concern of who's going to be able to get these houses. Something else that we would recommend maybe is to have shorter leases, so maybe a year or less, so that it gives people the opportunity to move out if they do not feel like this is the community for them. And the people that are therefore like really wanting to get into this community, then they could jump in on the spot if someone decides to leave.
Thank you.
So to follow up on that, as part of the executive leadership, I would ask you as consultants, to be transparent, we would need a list of criteria that we would tell people about how things will be decided on who's going to get, there are 19,000 homes or living accommodations, and there's a lot more demand. The other is, could you comment on whether it would be wise, if these are modular, why doesn't Google just build them all and then designate in a scattered way, mixed in with everything else, 20% of the available space is affordable housing? The city, I presume, has criteria for who gets an affordable house, what you need to apply. But as far as designating, there's no one place within the town. It's just, my neighbor is affordable housing and I'm not. I don't know that. There are places that do that. And it seems to work. Should Google do that, and would that be more or less expensive?
We think you've mentioned a really great idea that Google could consider. One of our immediate concerns with that, though, is just knowing that Google's planning on the current plan right now is for your company to develop your part of the town over the next 20 years, which places some issues if we're kind of intermixing those affordable housing units in, that they're going to be becoming available over the next 20 years. Whereas if there is a separate area, there's an opportunity to develop that land first. The city can start there, get those affordable houses right away, so that can be driving a difference or making an impact. But you bring up a very good point. It's something that we think
us and you should talk a little more about, to kind of explore how we want to balance that possible issue of making groups feel isolated versus the speed that we can actually complete this project and create those affordable houses.
Thank you. Well, let's just close out. If I could ask one question at the end. Here you are sitting with us. We are every single VP that exists in Google, which is a fairly rare meeting. We have finance people, we have our marketing VP, supply, HR. What do you want from us? What can we give you today that's going to be valuable as you continue in this endeavor? You have a chance to get any information or anything you want. What would you like? What do you need?
Yeah, so we would love kind of to get more details from you first financially, what you're willing to spend on this project, what kind of returns you're seeking over the long run, and how you want that to look like. We also, I think we'd like to know just marketing wise, like how you'd want to, we'd love to work with you to kind of see how does Google typically roll out a communication plan? How do you typically communicate with your stakeholders to make sure that that's in alignment with what your company does, so we can make sure this plan is tailored to Google and we're aligning with what you'd like to do. I think those are the main two things, but Anna or Annika, is there anything else that we'd like today?
Sure. I think that something that's important, if we have all the VPs here at the C-suite, if you can just shoot it to us straight, how important are your ethics to you? Because when we're looking at this, a lot of companies will present that their ethics are very important to them and that they lead their decisions, but at the end of the day, they're more concerned about the bottom line. And we want to know, if we're taking on this endeavor with you, if we want to continue to consult with you, are you going to let those ethics guide you? And are those going to be at the forefront of your mind as we take on this project? Or would you like us to take a higher consideration into the financials? Because we ultimately want to give an ethical solution that's going to present Google's values and Google's good intentions to the community of who Google wants to be. But if we can't work with you guys on that, if it's more about the bottom line, then we would like to know that up front so we know what to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. Annika?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. So I think we would really like to know your intention behind this corporate town. Is your intention to help solve this housing crisis, or is it more kind of what Anna was mentioning, impacting the bottom line? Are you trying to increase retention and attraction rates? Like Sarah asked, are we trying to make housing for every type of Google employee, no matter the income? Or are we trying to make as many houses as we can just to increase the supply and really help the housing crisis? So I think we would love to know your intent behind this corporate town.
Great, thank you. Any judges, any other questions at the moment? Okay. Oh, Leon?
No, I don't have.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to move into our next phase now. Thank you very much. We are now taking off our hats and coming back to exactly who we are as regular people, us and you. And what we'd like to do for you is to just give you some feedback from us and on your analysis, on your presentation. And if you choose to take any of this information and incorporate it into your 10-minute presentations, that's certainly up to you. The judges will be a different set tomorrow. I'll just lead off with a piece. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it, and I could tell that you really delved into this and really you seem to enjoy it. You seem to really grasp the whole business ethics piece. And I loved what happened at the end there, Anna, when you really hit us where we needed to be hit, and that is, what in the world? Come on, let's really talk ethics. And I do think that Google with their do no evil, I don't know if they still use that term, but that was, I think, their original ethics term. Sometimes Google maybe talks more than they actually act. Maybe. I don't actually know. But to the extent that you could get the C-suite to tell you confidentially what is this really about? That would put you in a great place as consultants. Who knows what you're going to get, but at a minimum, you're calling them out in a very gentle way and saying, come on, enough BS here. Let's just really talk. Okay, I love that. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Anna. And let me see, just one minor part. I really like the fact that you did use your cameras. I know that that's difficult. I see a lot of these Zoom meetings, people are looking down, but it's very much more effective when you look into the camera. And when you did that, I can promise you, you're more effective. And to the extent that you can use that going forward, because I'm afraid we're going to be using Zoom even after COVID's over. I think we're going to be a Zoom society for a while. So you will set yourselves apart by looking into the microphone, into the camera, because I rarely see that. Thank you very much. Rest of the judges, feedback, please.
Well, I would, I think you did an excellent job. In doing the presentation, you did answer a lot of my questions as I started out, and you did lay out how this differs from the old concept of a corporate town. My suggestion would be one that you concentrate on using the term neighborhood during the discussion, especially in the short presentations, to enhance that separation from the old town and sort of telling the board of Google, stop using the word town, this is a neighborhood. In terms of what you brought up, Anna, I would also, while it's unclear what Google has asked you to do, maybe you just tell them, since we're making believe a little bit, that you want to increase retention and gather more people, and the town and the shortage makes it impossible, and this is going to be your solution. And also to lay it in the context during your presentation of, here are your values, and we're going to tell you what it will look like for you to live those values as you implement this program. It's then up to you, board, to decide, are you ready to live them, even if it costs you money? And that puts it back, and then without them having to say, because if you ask somebody, are you ready to live your values? They're going to say yes. How many of us are going to say, no, we don't live our values, we only care about the money? Screw it. You know, maybe there's one corporation in New York that might do that. But but if you lay it, I would believe that if you lay it out that way, this is what it looks like when you live the values you state you live by, and then describe what your solution is. And then they can decide they don't want to. And especially if you're doing the 90-second or 10-minute or whatever, you're not going to have time to lay it out as well as you did for us today. So you just go and tell them. But thank you. This is very nicely done. Very interesting. Well beyond my wheelhouse and fascinating.
Jessica, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Great job, everybody. I wanted to add on to what Jim said about you just did a great job with communication. Looking at the camera, it sounded very professional. You looked professional. You weren't stumbling over each other, which I think is actually a big deal on Zoom. So really nice job being kind of organized and who is answering what. And also I liked how you supported each other. So it wasn't just, I'm going to trust my colleague to answer that. You would pepper in additional pieces of feedback to support each other. And I think that was really nice, especially considering how you all considered different pieces of the ethical, legal, and business puzzle. It was clear that you could add on pieces of that to support your answers during the Q&A. So nice work on that. In terms of feedback for you on areas of opportunity, I'd just say my mind works in a really linear way. And so when we're talking about business, legal, and ethical lenses, I liked how at the beginning you said very clearly, this proposal is supported from a business and legal lens, but then you had kind of a question mark about the ethics. I would have liked to either hear an ultimate right at the beginning, like, yes, this is ethically viable if we land on this, this, and this, or to propose a question for us to consider throughout the presentation on the ethical lens so that we know we need to help you come to a decision at the end, if that makes sense. So kind of from a bottom line on top, it was very clear from business and legal what you were proposing and that this was viable. But for ethics, you kind of left the door open at the beginning of, we're not totally sure if this will be ethical. We'll talk about it throughout. And I would have liked to just hear your firm recommendation of, yes, this is doable if we do it ethically, and here's how we're going to help you do it ethically, if that makes sense. Final thing that I'll just call out before handing it over is I'd like a little bit more focus on the employees and the business. I think we focus so much on affordable housing, but realistically, if I'm an executive at Google, I have a lot of interests that are internal to Google, most of which are the employees. I think that's really clear with the culture of Google, that it's a powerful lens towards supporting the employees. So more from you all on how this is good for our business. I like how we assume that we are looking out for the best interests of the communities in which we live. But the truth is, I would say we probably won't do that unless it's also equally as good for our business and our employees. So maybe a little more focus on that would have helped me as an executive feel like I'm meeting all of these stakeholder needs.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I think you did a really great job. And the first comment that I have is I really appreciated your slides and the way you used Google's colors. I thought it looked really well done and put together. So like from that very aesthetic choice, I really liked that. I echo everything that everyone else has said, especially Jim. Google has like the do no evil catchphrase, but they're actually under so much fire in Europe, right, for the privacy negotiations. And they have all of this stuff happening about the things that they have done that are unethical. But breaking that apart, I think you guys have a really interesting opportunity because there's this whole subsect of the population that hates tech companies. But there's also this huge subsection of the community that loves them because they work for them and they're from the Bay Area and it's part of life. So I do think there's an opportunity as you guys are consultants, and being a consultant is really hard because companies never tell you what they want or what the deliverable is. So to make that recommendation of like, screw all these other people, basically, like, this is what we think is going to work for our community and our constituency, basically. But ethically, for your ethics only competition, the one piece of advice that I would give just from kind of like a flow basis is back to the history of the corporate town, the what and why, because the sticky thing about it in my mind, and others can comment, isn't actually the isolation or the kind of like the effects of it, but it's the kind of like basic construct of should a corporation even own a town? Because part of the reason we put up with all of the weirdness in the towns that we live in, like I live in DC, is because it's this social compact of living in a government where everyone is equally represented. And we have 250 years of what those rules look like. So as soon as you remove the government as that kind of arbitration body and you replace it with a corporation, you run into this really interesting thing where it's like, well, they don't have a constitution. I didn't vote for them. They now own the land that I live on. What are their rights? How does the profiteering aspect of this kind of work into things? So part of the reason corporate towns existed back in the day is that that wasn't fully ironed out. And now that it kind of is, the reintroduction of those is going to stir up all of those issues of individual rights and privacy and resource allocation. So I think Google obviously has not thought about that in life, but for you all, especially in that ethics only competition, I would really think about like, is there a way to do this that is ethical? Because I'm sure there is a way to argue that. But I would really start early with like parsing that out and maybe even like a couple of historical examples. Like I'm thinking about the Guinness factory in Dublin, Ireland, right? Where people used to live in company property. Lowell, Massachusetts was this massive corporate city basically for a really long time. And there's good there, but that would be kind of the biggest thing that I would want to tease apart. Is sort of like, where does Google fit in the structure of individual rights and privacy? But I again think like your presentation was great. You worked together really well. We can tell you really prepared, and thank you for all of your hard work.
So to follow up on Sarah's comment, one of the reasons for emphasizing that this is a neighborhood is that the city government still governs that area, that making clear to the Google management, they are not the government. They are not. Now it's a problem because worldwide corporations are becoming governments, especially in areas of failed states. And so it's a question that has to be asked and thought about. And so it's a very good point that Sarah makes, and emphasizing as part of the ethics thing to the Google board, you are not the government. You may be a realtor, but you're not the government. That doesn't hide the fact that because they are the major source of income in the town, they may well be the government, whether they've asked to be or not.
Great. Thanks, Leon. Do you have any questions for us at all, team? Were we clear in our feedback, or is there anything else we can offer you?
Yeah, I think that was very clear and that was really amazing. We haven't had a competition before where we get immediate feedback, so it was a really great opportunity for us to hear. And I really appreciate that you gave us not just things we did well, but opportunities to change. And I think tonight we're going to look at some of those when we're crafting our 10-minute presentation. So we really appreciate that and having the chance to be here.
Good, good. And there was a lot of good in there. We told you about opportunities to improve, but don't forget, you had a lot of good stuff in there too. Anna, anything we can answer for you?
Not for me personally. To echo what Katherine said, I think that the feedback is fantastic, and we're definitely going to take everything you guys said into consideration to guide our ethics presentation, because there is a lot to break down from that, 25-minute presentation down to the 10. So really, we appreciate it, and this has been a really great experience with IBEX so far. I really enjoy this competition.
All right, well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Hanukkah, do you have any questions for us?
I don't, but yeah, thank you. It's really helpful since we have the 10-minute presentation tomorrow to kind of restructure some of our ethics. So thank you for that. Really enjoyed this presentation, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much for putting in the time. We all love IBEC here, and the contribution that you make to what we're doing is so important. And again, I said before, I hope that you'll have the opportunity to in some way become involved with us in the future, either competing or who knows, maybe you'll end up in the industry and you want to be a judge with us. So thank you very much. Robbie, why don't we have you send our team on its way? The judges and I will spend just a few minutes together. Good luck on your 10-minute.
Good luck and thank you. Excellent presentation.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.